Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we are going to be talking specifically about Dungeons & Dragons and how Dungeons & Dragons is portrayed in the Riverdale show, specifically in Season 3. And even more specifically than that, in Season 3 between Episodes 1 and Episode 7. That's how much of it I've experienced, how much I've seen, and I'm reporting in real time, like as I watch through this, because I'm pretty amazed at what I'm seeing, and I wanted to take the time to comment on it, like as I'm going through it. So this is specifically my comments on how Dungeons and Dragons is portrayed within Riverdale between episodes 1 and episode 7 of season 3. There is spoilers for Riverdale, all seasons in this content. All right. Okay, so it's really, I think it's really fascinating what's happening on Riverdale. Riverdale, specifically with in conjunction with Dungeons and Dragons. So right now, season 3 is complete, and it's up on Netflix. I'm watching it through Netflix, and specifically, there is a game that is portrayed within Riverdale called Griffins and Gargoyles. The characters then refer to the game as G&G, right? The parallels to Griffins and Gargoyles being a very, very thinly veiled reference to Dungeons and Dragons. The veil is so thin, it's absolutely see-through, right? So basically, G&G, D&D, Griffins and Gargoyles, Dungeons and Dragons. And it is referred to as a role-playing game. It uses the same dice as Dungeons & Dragons. It uses miniatures exactly the way Dungeons & Dragons does. It uses a rule book exactly the way Dungeons & Dragons does. I really feel that it's a very thin veil that is masking Griffins and Gargoyles not being a very clear analog, a very clear representation of Dungeons and Dragons within Riverdale. That's my opinion. For the purposes of legality, I think Riverdale is safe. I don't think they're going to, I don't think they're safe. I think they're safe. They're telling a story, and you can refer to a real life element within a story and use it, right? So, but what is being said about Dungeons and Dragons, in my opinion, in Riverdale? Well, I was shocked, right? Griffins and Gargoyles is not presented in Riverdale as a fun, helpful hobby. It is presented as an incredibly dangerous. It is presented as dangerous, evil, and suspicious, right? And I'm like, whoa, wait, this is surprising, right? Now, why is it surprising that the show Riverdale would present Dungeons and Dragons as inscrutable, dangerous, and evil, right? Well, the reason why that's surprising is there was a time when Dungeons & Dragons was referred to in real life as inscrutable, dangerous, and evil. And that was in the 1980s. There was a very serious 80s satanic panic, right? And this, at the time, was a very real crisis with the youth of America and with the public's reaction to the game. And TSR had to very, very carefully manage a political, a cultural, a social crisis with their game, right? It was a very real concern, right? Now, everybody that was in the 80s that was saying that Dungeons & Dragons was inscrutable, dangerous, and evil, right, would be referred to today as not woke, right? Now, here's why it's surprising that Riverdale would present Dungeons and Dragons through Griffins and Gargoyles as inscrutable, dangerous, and evil, because Riverdale is super woke, like super woke, right? Okay, if you think I'm wrong there, just look at the intersectionality on this show. So one, the primary ingredient of woke today is intersectionality, right? So basically, if you're going to be accepted as woke, you have to present on our intersectionality extremely well. You have to show, and the show does, right? So Riverdale has a wide cast of characters that are spread across internet, that are spread across ethnicity, that are spread across gender, that are spread not just that are spread across gender, and that are spread across who their preferred romantic partners are, right? And it is incredibly well crafted, right? It is incredibly carefully crafted to present a super woke pastiche, right? Okay. So, and the reason why is this show is for young people. Riverdale is for young people. It's very clear Archie is an old Riverdale is a television show that is telling the story of Archie from the comics. Archie's an ancient, 50, 60-year-old comic book. But recently, the person who created Archie died. The entire intellectual property is in the hands of his children. And his children are like, we're going to make this woke. We're going to make this modern. We're going to make this for young people, right? Because they don't want the brand to die. It's very smart, right? By the way, I'm a Riverdale fan. I've watched everything up to season 3, episode 7, right? And I really enjoy the show. I think it's fantastic. I think it's really well executed. I like the show. Okay, so basically, but Riverdale is super woke, right? So here you have this super woke show saying something as the message of the show that is super unwoke, right? And I was thinking, wait, that's weird, right? There wouldn't be, they wouldn't really tell a story. And the reason why Riverdale has to be super woke and it has to execute really well on its wokeness is it's for young people. And young people care a lot about being woke. That is like their main jam now, right? It is the main thing. So you cannot make a product for young people that isn't super woke now, because you will quickly go out of business, right? So it was really amazing to me to see Riverdale presenting Dungeons & Dragons in this really unwoke, very archaic way, right? And I'm like, what's going on here? Why is this happening, right? So I gave it some thought, and I'm going to give you my opinion on it. I'd love to hear your opinion. Let me know in the comments below if you think I'm right or wrong, or if you think there's something's happening and I'm missing. But this is my breakdown of the issue. So basically, in the 80s, right? There were people who their parents, their churches, their friend groups, the organizations within their local area said to them, you are playing Dungeons & Dragons. That game is inscrutable, it is dangerous, and it is evil, right? And then those people had the people that were being accused of playing this, inscrutable, dangerous, evil game. They had ramifications that were visited upon them for playing it, right? They were denied essentially respect. They were denied dignity. They were denied trust, right? And so you're like, hey, this is a dark time in our history, and there was this group of people who were really who suffered woe, right? Now, when you talk about intersectionality, right? Intersectionality matters for groups that have suffered woe. So if you are a group that has suffered woe, you have priority in the grouping of intersectionality, right? And so if you have multiple intersectionalities, if you're one person and you have multiple intersectionalities that would have each introduced different woes into your life, you're prioritized higher on the woke hierarchy, right? Okay. All right. So I was thinking, why is Riverdale able to roll up on Dungeons and Dragons and repeat these super non-woke lines from the 80s without ramifications? Why wouldn't the young people of today say, hey, you can't just say D&D is inscrutable, dangerous, and evil. We've already gone over this, and we've lambasted all the people who said that in the 80s as being wrong, right? So you're repeating their non-woke lines from the 80s right here in the 2010s, right? That's not cool. But the young people are not saying that. No one's saying that, right? Like, that is not a line that's being heard about Riverdale, right? Now, why? Why is this? Well, I think the reason why is the people who suffered woe, in the reason that Dungeons and Dragons is now grist, okay? There's a term called grist for the mill. It is grain that has been ground into flour in a mill, okay? Now, when people say grist for the mill, what they really mean is grist. They mean useful material, especially for backing up an argument, right? Now, they're not backing up. Now, actually, there is an argument being made in Riverdale, right, that this role-playing game, Griffin and Gargoyles, is inscrutable, dangerous, and evil, right? It's said multiple times in the show, right? But I think it's not. So Dungeons and Dragons, in this case, with being used as a parallel to Griffins and Gargoyles, is not being used for grift for an argument. It's being used as grist for a story, right? Riverdale's got a story to tell, right? And they're like, we can absolutely insult Dungeons and Dragons again. We can insult Dungeons and Dragons now, right? And I'm going to tell you why, right? And they're saying it's grist for our story. Now, the reality is, like, if you take a group who suffered woe and you're like, hey, you're grist for my story, right? Like, you got to be super careful about that, right? Because the reality is, generally, and actually, I'm getting to why they're doing this with Riverdale and why they don't need to be careful on Riverdale, right? So generally, if you're like, oh, there's this story about, about a certain group of people, they suffered a lot of woe, and now it's just grist for my story, you will get slapped down hard on the internet. People are like, you're ignorant of this, you're inept, or you have some special interest. People will call out those, they'll say, no, you can't do this, right? This episode of woe in American history is not grist for your story, right? So why is it being allowed here on Riverdale? Well, I'll tell you why. I think the reason why is now two reasons. We look back on what happened with Dungeons & Dragons, and people are now saying, okay, there was a group of people who were, denied dignity, denied respect, denied trust, right? But that group of people at the macro level, there were certainly exceptions, but at the macro level, they were low intersectionality. Very, very low intersectionality, right? And that is the one group within woke culture that you can go hard against. You can absolutely go hard against low intersectionality people within woke. It's definitely part of it because they're like, hey, like here, colonialism, right? Like, people can go hard at, the British and say, hey, you colonized half the world. That wasn't cool, man. You should still be paying. You still have a cultural debt. You have a societal debt. You have a political debt for colonizing half the world and treating people poorly when they were colonized, right? British people are low intersectionality generally, at the highest level of the culture. And so so woke culture can come hard at them. Absolutely. They could do it in academics. They could do it, in entertainment. They could do it in novels. They could do it in, fiction, all kinds of different platforms. You can, you have no problem, rolling up hard against the British for colonialism, right? Because they're low intersectionality. And I think that's why we're seeing what we're seeing on Riverdale. When I watched Riverdale's portrayal of Dungeons & Dragons through Griffins and Gargoyles, I'm like, what on earth is going on here? Why do we have a super woke show echoing this super non-woke stuff from the 80s? These super non-woke lines from the 80s. It's really strange. Well, the reason why is they're using it as grist for their story, and the reason they could do that safely among the young people is because they're coming at it's now, in my opinion, believed that the people at the macro level, there were certainly exceptions, but at the macro level, the people who suffered in the 80s were low intersectionality. So their plight really doesn't matter that much. We don't really need to be that careful. We don't need to tiptoe around it today, right? Really, really fascinating. I don't know if it's right or wrong. I don't know if Riverdale is right or wrong. I haven't made up my mind on that. I'm really still kind of processing it, right? But the reality is it's absolutely fascinating that we have gotten to the point where a super woke show can repeat very non-woke lines from the 1980s and suffer no reprisal from the woke culture. Really, really, really interesting, right? Really fascinating, right? So you, and then also the second reason is, Riverdale is a drama, but there's a good bit of, it almost runs like a sitcom, right? And I feel when people are watching this, they're kind of laughing at Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm like, hey, this is a portrayal of very real problems that happened in the 80s. How is this laughable, right? How is this laughable, right? Why is this funny to anyone, right? And I do think it's being played for some laughs, the way it's being presented in Riverdale. And I want to, I think now in 2019, we've reached a point where the Satanic Panic is the 80s Satanic Panic around Dungeons and Dragons is laughable, right? Now, why would we be there, right? Again, this is super shocking to me. Why would we arrive at this destination within woke culture that you could literally laugh at what happened in the 80s, the 80s Satanic Panic around D&D? Well, there's a few reasons. One, low intersectionality. I already mentioned it. Two, D&D survived it, right? Not only did D&D survive it, but it put the 80s Satanic Panic fully behind itself, right? And then the last one, and this is really, really, really important, is the 80s Satanic Panic was parents being really upset, really frightened by their kids playing Dungeons and Dragons as a game, right? But now, today, in 2019, that is very, very laughable, right? That 80s Satanic Panic, I think we've arrived at a point where that is quite laughable. Now, of course, there were some exceptions. There were some really sad things that happened. Nobody's forgetting that, right? But at the macro level, the amount of response to the few episodes that actually happened that had some adjacency to D&D, overall the response was deemed to be way overkill, right? And the other issue is, we're basically today, parents look at parents being afraid of a game and they go, are you kidding me? We have real problems, right? And so what are real problems for kids today, right? Well, real things that really concern parents today are drugs. Number one, I think that is the most, every parent in America is concerned about drugs, and darn well they should be. Like, we've reached a point where meth isn't even that dangerous, right? Like, fentanyl is coming up. It's even worse than meth. It's incredibly dangerous, incredibly frightening. It is horrific, right? Like, and parents are like genuinely concerned about drugs. They're like, I ain't got time to worry about your 300-page rule book. I got to make sure my kid isn't on fentanyl, right? Like, or heroin, right? It's big. It's a very serious concern, right? The other one is physical safety, right? Parents today, more than any time ever, are really concerned about their physical safety. Now, this one's an strange one. I think your kid's probably less likely to be kidnapped today than any time in history, right? In America, they're probably safer today, but people's frightenedness and their concern about the physical safety of their kids is at an all-time high because of the way it's handled in the media. So that's another one, right? But parents have genuine concern. They are genuinely concerned about the physical safety of their kids. So you have drugs, you have physical safety, and here's another one: social stability, right? Parents are very, very concerned about social stability, right? And this is a very real concern, and the reason why is generally divorce and latchkey, okay? So basically, with Gen Z and with millennials and with Gen X, divorce came from the boomers like crazy, right? And the reality is there are studies that say, hey, kids can be okay on, if they go through divorce if it's handled perfectly. But if you don't, but one thing that it has become very clear is that at the macro level, divorce doesn't help a single child, right? Like, at the macro level, divorce does not help children. That has become super clear, right? Like, and so they're saying, okay, if a child, even though a child has 2 Christmases, even though a child has 2 PlayStations, even though a child now has two super dope bedrooms that are being built out for them. It's still not cool. It is not helping them in any way, and many of them suffer massive social instability, their own self-esteem, and a million different other problems from being children of divorce. It's a major problem. And then in addition to that, latchkey, right? I had a few friends who were latchkey when I was a kid. Wonderful people, very nice, right? But one of the things that people are saying is, we now have, and this was really big in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and I don't think we even know the numbers anymore on what it is, but basically there are a lot of kids who, both parents are working, and they may need to leave school, come home, make themselves food, do all their homework on their own, and stay out of trouble all on their own 5 days a week, right? That's a latchkey situation, right? And parents are going, hey, we got this on lock. We are providing for everybody. Everybody in the house has food. Everybody in the house has shelter. Everybody in the house has clothes, right? But the reality is we can't be there with that child after school, right? And when we come home from working, we are really stressed, and you have spouses who are like, this is hard, right? And the other thing is they're saying, oh my gosh, my kid is alone a lot of the, when it would be helpful if there was a spouse that was there for them, right? And they're going, oh my gosh, we are seeing the impact in their social stability, right? So this is a very real concern. Like, people are like, I'm worried about the social stability of my child because of this, very large, broad problem in America. I ain't got time to worry if my kid is reading a 300-page rule book. Wait, did you say my kid read a 300-page rule book? That sounds good. And is doing a bunch of math. That sounds good. And is hanging out with their friends, not online, right? That sounds good, right? Like, it has become utterly laughable that anyone would fear this game. Now, with 45 years of the game behind us, the idea of the 80s satanic panic is laughable, and it is being laughed at on Riverdale, right? So that is low intersectionality is the reason I think this woke show is getting away with repeating this very non-woke 80s line. And I think parents' genuine concerns about drugs, physical safety, and divorce and social stabilization of their children has made the 80s satanic panic absolutely laughable to the majority of American parents. This is an incredible arrival. This is an incredible destination to have arrived. It shocks me, right? But what about you? What do you think? Are you surprised by this? Do you think I'm understanding what's being said on Riverdale correctly? I'd love to know your opinion. Please let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.